my channel. I hope you're doing well. This video is part 2 of my How Easy Is It to Move to Canada series, or 2 videos. If you haven't seen part 1, make sure to check that out. I will put the link above and also down below. It was my most recent video before this, so if you are interested, don't forget to have a look and check it out. And if you like it, why not subscribe? Anyway, let's get down to the video. So in my last video, I was talking about getting the visa, moving to Canada, rentals, banks, things like that. And today I'm going to go a bit further and talk about jobs, travel, housekeeping back home, and how I stayed for longer. Because if you didn't know, I've been in Canada for 5.5 years, so I did stay longer than my original 2 years working holiday visa. And that is because I fell in love with the country. And if you're wondering why that is, I also have a video on why I moved to Canada. So if you're interested in that, I'll also link that above and below. So I kind of did the rental and the job thing backwards because I'd highly recommend getting a job before getting a permanent rental. But a lot of people obviously need a place to live, which is why I did the rentals first. For me, I got the job first and then I did my rental. We just lived in Airbnbs for a little while and with Mike's parents for a little while before we both got our jobs. So if you can do that, I would definitely recommend doing that because getting a rental is going to be much easier if you have a job in place already. But obviously getting a job as a newcomer in Canada or a newcomer anywhere is going to be difficult. So some of the best things that I learned was to be open, but also don't take the first thing that comes to you, especially if you don't want to do it. I think what a lot of people do is kind of take the first thing that comes to you, and if you can, I would say wait for something that you feel that you're really passionate about or that you can see yourself doing for a long period of time. But more than that, if you want to stay for longer, make sure that you're getting a job that's going to help you get permanent residency. Because there are jobs that are going to give you more points than others if you're applying for permanent residency, especially if you're applying through the express entry route with skilled jobs and things like that. So make sure to check out the Canadian government website because they have all the jobs listed up there. So when you're looking for a job, and if you're thinking of staying for longer than your 2 years, that's definitely something to bear in mind. Another thing that I did which really helped and was the way that I got my first job was working with a recruiter that knows how to place internationals. Now, obviously, a lot of jobs are going to be temporary or they're going to be part-time and things like that for people that are new to Canada that have temporary visas, because employers don't always want to employ somebody who might just go away after 2 years. But there are exceptions and you will find them. But I found working with a recruiter was much easier because recruiters have access to jobs that aren't just on Indeed and LinkedIn. And also working with a recruiter means that someone is fighting in your corner and there's someone who's there to represent you and show you in your best light to potential employers. If you are interested in a more deeper dive into how I got my first job, I also have a video on that, which I will link above and down below. One of the most interesting things I found about working in Canada is that the salary was much higher than what I was used to in England, but also the cost of living is higher. So before you think, wow, the money is amazing, you have to remember in places like Toronto, for example, cost of living is much higher, but you will find that the jobs do match the cost of living. So although I'll say things like Toronto is really expensive, I would say that in my experience and opinion, salaries do tend to match up to that. Obviously there are exceptions, but in my experience, the salaries do match up to your cost of living. So that is, I think, a really important thing to remember when you are planning to move over, because you might see cost of living and prices of rentals and things and be like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. But also make sure to look at the salaries in your industry and in your profession and in your area of interest, because you will, I think, often find that they do match. And if you are working in Toronto, you should be able to live there too. That's what should happen. Obviously, there are many exceptions, but in my experience, that is what I found. Another thing that I found really interesting about Canada, especially with compensation, is that benefits packages that you get with jobs are really common and quite an important part of your compensation. I remember having like little health benefits when I was in the UK, but nothing like I did in Canada. The health benefits that you get with jobs here, I think, are much better than in the UK, and I think they are generally expected. I'm not sure how rare it is to find a job that doesn't offer these things. Things like you'll get allowances for massage or your eyesight, glasses, acupuncture, physiotherapy, All those kind of health benefits, you'll get things like life insurance sometimes, bonuses I think are a lot more common here. Things like that. So if you've been offered a job, make sure to look through your contract and check those things out. I think in Canada it does play a much bigger part, especially because the health service doesn't work the same as the UK. Like, we have the NHS in the UK and there is provincial health coverage in Canada, but it isn't the same. There are a lot of things that you have to pay for example, prescriptions. In the UK, you have like the NHS levy, I believe that's what still exists, at least it existed for me, which means that whatever prescription that you get from your doctor, you pay the same amount. Whereas in Canada, it's not the same. Depending on the prescription you get, you have to pay for it. I've paid anywhere between $20 for a prescription and $120 for a prescription. So when you have health benefits with your work, especially ones that will kind of help you out with the cost of prescriptions and things like that, it can be a really, really huge benefit. So it's definitely something worth taking into consideration when you're looking through your contracts or if you're negotiating with a job. So yeah, that's definitely an important one to think of. And along with benefits and bonuses and things like that, when you're looking at your job, look at the vacation. I cannot stress this enough, because especially coming from a place like the UK, where the standard vacation days, I think it's the minimum, is 20 days. In Canada, the minimum is 10 days. Yes, you heard that right. The minimum, I believe, is 10 days for full-time workers, which is insane coming from a place like England where you have 20 days minimum. Now, I think a lot of places will offer 15. I think that is generally the standard, but even 15 coming from the UK, that's a whole week less than what you'd get. And especially if you're moving countries, you tend to use your vacation to go back home. So trying to actually travel elsewhere with limited days vacation is kind of annoying. So seeing if you can, for example, bank days, or you can negotiate additional days, or getting things like personal days, which are sometimes offered with Canadian contracts, is really beneficial too. So you might have a PTO allocation, which is personal time off, but you might also get, for example, 3 personal days, which aren't personal time off. They're like things like if you need to move, or if you need to go to an appointment, or things like that. So there are different ways that companies offer these things, and it's definitely worth taking that into account. Another thing that I found really different are sick days. I'm not sure if this is the same with everywhere in the UK, but for me, I never knew of allocated sick days. Like, if you were sick, you just kind of stayed at home and that was that. And some places pay you and some places don't. But in Canada, you tend to have allocated sick days. So you could have 3 sick days for the year that you're paid for. And I think things like that are very different, but really important to consider, especially if you're not only just looking for a job, but if you're considering moving to Canada. If these are important things to you, like if having 4 weeks vacation is important to you, and you're like, I want to move to Canada, you have to remember that you might have to sacrifice some of those days. Now, you might not. You might land a job that offers you these 20 days, or you might be able to negotiate it. But remembering that the minimum is 10 days, as I said, the standard I think is 15, but I believe the minimum is 10. It's definitely that, I think, is a really important consideration, especially if you are working full-time in Canada. If you're working as an entrepreneur or you work for yourself, then you don't have to worry about it. But for me, I think that that was something that I never considered, but it's something that I wish I'd kind of thought about before I moved. The next thing I'm going to talk about is travel, and this tends to be travel within Canada. So for example, public transport and traveling in between cities and things like that. Now, I mentioned in my last video that flights are very expensive in Canada. That reigns true for domestic flights too. They are wickedly expensive in comparison to the UK and Europe and the US and places like that, for reasons I'm not quite sure of. But beyond that, public transport in Canada is terrible. This was one of the biggest culture shocks that I experienced moving to Canada. For example, Mike's parents lived in a very small town in the middle of nowhere in Ontario, and I was extremely surprised to find out that they didn't have a bus service at all. Not even one. Not even one an hour or one a day. No bus service. There was not one bus that ran through there that could get you anywhere. You had to have a car or you were staying in that town. Which to me is crazy, because in the UK, even some of the most remote villages still have a bus that runs through every hour or every couple of hours. So unless you're living in a city, for example, you're in Toronto, which has fairly decent public transport. For example, it has the subway and the streetcars and trains, things like that, or Vancouver. If you're in those cities and you want to stay in those cities, that's great. You can probably get away with using public transport. But if you want to go anywhere else or you live anywhere else, you're gonna need a car. The good thing about cars in Canada is that I've found that they're significantly cheaper to run. Gas is cheaper, for example, and I think that's just because everyone really needs them. They're so convenient, and even though they're terrible for the environment, honestly, I would say that you really, really do need at least one between two people to really take full advantage of living in Canada, but also getting around, especially if you're living in places that are not Toronto and Vancouver and other big cities like that. When it comes to driving licenses, I was really thrilled to find out that the UK license, when I first came over here, could be swapped over for a Canadian license. You don't have to take an extra test if you have a certain number of years experience, and that was super beneficial. I remember taking my driving test and hated it, so honestly that was like one of the best things I learned coming to Canada. But you have to sacrifice your British license, so it's definitely something to consider if you're only coming over for 2 years, because then you'll have to switch it back. But you can only, I believe, drive on your British license for a certain amount of time in Canada before you have to get either, I think it's an international license, or switch over to your Canadian license. So I think it differs between provinces. It's definitely worth checking out. But for me, when I was in Ontario, I literally took my full British driving license, went into I think it was a Service Ontario, literally went in. I remember it so well. It was like a boiling hot day in the middle of August, and I had to wait there for 4 hours. I couldn't like make an appointment. I had to sit there and wait, and I basically handed in my UK license. They looked at it, they kind of like confirmed with, I guess, their head office or something, and then they issued me a Canadian license. I also had to take an eye test while I was there and have my picture taken, and then they just issued me an Ontario license. Another kind of boring thing about moving to Canada, which I didn't really consider until I moved over here, was housekeeping back home, and specifically making sure your addresses are up to date. I found that a lot of places like banks, and if you have like investment accounts, it's very hard to change your address to another country. Sometimes you have to like call places or like write letters to banks, which is really bizarre. So making sure that all of your addresses and contact information at home is up to date is really important, especially, for example, if you have like your student loans, because you have to keep paying your student loans even if you leave the country, and it is a different process living abroad than it is to back home. In the UK, when I was there at least, if you had a student loan, it just came out of your paycheck before you even saw it and it was done. But if you move abroad, you have to kind of do it yourself. You have to make sure that you are keeping student finance up to date with where you are, how much you're earning, and then paying back your student loan. I think it's something that, with the excitement of moving abroad, a lot of people forget about, and it's very important. I think especially with like your bank accounts and your investment accounts and your student loans and things like that, keeping those things up to date and making sure that you are taking responsibility for paying things back like student loans is very, very important. And finally, staying for longer. So as soon as I came to Canada, I knew that I wanted to stay for longer, and I knew also that I wouldn't be able to extend my IC visa, and I knew that I could only apply for it once. So the route that I wanted to take was permanent residency. There are many different routes to getting permanent residency, and I would highly recommend talking to an immigration lawyer or professional, like even just as an initial meeting, just to kind of ask questions and get some answers as to which route that you can take, because it really does differ for everybody. Not just permanent residency, but also like the IEC visa, it's for under 30s. And if you're over 30, the way that you're going to get to Canada is going to be very, very different. So making sure that you're asking these questions and talking to the right people is super important. There are a lot of scammers out there, so make sure that you're talking to reputable people. And if you know of someone who's done it before, ask for recommendations. Immigration visas are not very fun, but it's incredibly important to keep on top of it. And I cannot stress this enough. Looking at the Canadian government website and talking to professionals really is the best bet. Obviously, you can watch YouTube videos and you can listen to me and my experience, but because it differs so much for individuals, you're never going to get somebody who's in the exact same position as you. So yeah, making sure that you're staying on top of news. Immigration things change all the time, not just for Canada, but for everywhere. So just make sure that you're staying on top of it. Make sure that you're looking at the government websites, because honestly, that is your best bet when you're trying to do immigration. And it really is the best piece of advice that I can give you. So in conclusion, moving to Canada is not easy. I don't think moving abroad or really moving anywhere is going to be easy, especially when you're picking up your life and you're moving to a completely different place, whether that is to a new state or a new city or a new province or a new country or a new continent. Wherever it is that you're going, it isn't going to be easy. But if it is something that you want to do, I think that it's one of the best things that you can do. Obviously, I have a whole channel dedicated to living abroad, and I'm a huge advocate for living abroad. And if you do have the opportunity to do it, I would say go do it, because for me, it's one of the best things that I ever did. And I think that is so beneficial for so many people to kind of live and experience in a different place. And if you do want to do it, it is doable and it is 100,000% worth it. 100,000% isn't even right, but you understand what I'm saying. Anyway, I really hope that you found these videos helpful. If you did, please don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel. And if you have any questions or comments, don't forget to drop them down below. I try to respond to everybody. So if you do have a question, I will try and help you out. Obviously, as I say, I'm not an immigration or financial expert. I'm just someone on YouTube who has done this and has experience and wants to share it and kind of, if I can, inspire people to do the same thing, if that's what they want to do. So I will try my very best, or I'll try and point you in the right direction. But if it is something to do with like immigration, I'm just gonna point you to the Canadian government website, because I don't have the answers that you need. And again, an immigration professional, government websites, they really are your best bet. So if you want to move abroad, I would say go for it, because it is freaking awesome. I post videos like this every single week too, so if you are interested in it, don't forget to hit subscribe and the notification bell so you can be notified when I next post a video. Until my next one, I hope you have